Hi, I'm Elly. Today I'm going to read you a book called Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Getaway, book 12. Okay, I'm going to read the rest of the pages. Wait a minute. Where did I? I think it's here. 32. The gate agent on a loudspeaker and said we'd be boarding shortly. Then she said our flight was overbooked and they needed a few volunteers to give up their seats. She said that whoever volunteered first would get $300 and a free night at the airport hotel. I didn't need to hear another word. I got to the desk before she'd even finished with her announcement and said I was her guide. Unfortunately, Mom wouldn't let me volunteer and nobody else stepped up either. So the gate agent increased the offer to $500 and someone was snapped it up right away. I just hope she enjoys spending my money. After that, the agent made another announcement. She said the flight crew on our plane had worked too many hours because of all the delays, and we had to wait for a replacement crew to come in before we could take off. Now everyone at our gate was mad because what was supposed to be an early flight was turning into an overnight one. When the new flight crew finally arrived, they didn't look happy to be there. That's probably because they were expecting to spend Christmas Eve at home, so I knew exactly how they felt. After that, the crew got on board. They started letting passengers on the plane. My family got first because they let people with young kids board before anyone else, but the gate agent stopped me at the door. She said my carry-on bag was too big to fit in the overhead bin, so it had to go down below with the rest of the luggage. That was fine with me because I didn't want to deal with my bag on the plane anyway. When I got on board, I was pretty impressed. The seats were a lot bigger than I expected, and they were covered in real leather. I asked Mom what row we were in, but she said we needed to keep moving. She said this was the first class section, and our seats were in economy. But the economy section wasn't half as nice as the first class. The seats were packed together, and they were barely had any cushioning. Mom said our seats were toward the middle of the plane, so we headed there. But Dad hung back in from the first class section. He said he got an upgrade because of the frequent flyer mile that he had cashed out with us after we landed. Mom didn't seem happy about this news. She said it wasn't fair for him to be in first class while we were in economy. So she said we'd all take turns sitting in that seat during the flight. Dad said the rest of us weren't experienced travelers like him, and we wouldn't even know how to act in first class. Luckily, there were other passengers trying to board, so Mom and Dad couldn't get into a full-blown argument right there in the aisle. Dad sat down in the seat, and we went to find ours. The rest of us were all in the same row. Mom, Roderick, and Manny sat on one side of the aisle, and I had the middle seat on the other side. Roderick tried to get me to switch with him so he didn't have to sit by Manny, but I was happy right where I was. I didn't have a whole lot of leg room, but other than that, it wasn't so bad. All of the other passengers boarded after us, and people seemed pretty stressed trying to get their stuff like the overhead bins, so I was glad they took my bags out of the gate. Everyone put away their bags and sat down in their new seats. The pillows made an announcement that the doors were closing, and the seats to my left and right were still empty. I couldn't believe my luck. As soon as we took off, I was gonna stretch out across all 3 seats and get myself a good night's sleep. I was even better than being in first class. But right before the door closed, one more couple got on board, and they had a baby with them. I didn't like these people would be in my row because there were only 2 empty seats, but my baby sat in my mother's lap. But the baby sat in the mother's lap. See, if I were in charge of the airline, the rule would be 1 person per seat, because if this couple had twins, it would have been completely out of hand. I asked these parents if one of them wanted to switch seats with me so they could be next to each other, but the mother said she liked the window and her husband said he liked to sit on the ice. After that, the pilot came to the intercom. He said that before we took off, there'd be a brief safety video to show us what to do in case of an emergency. I was already nervous about flying to begin with, and I didn't like hearing there might be an emergency. So when the safety video played, I paid attention. But as far as I could tell, I was the only person who did. Everybody else completely turned out. The beginning of the video was just basic stuff, just how to fasten a seatbelt. But after that, it got serious. The video's narrator said there was a loss in cabin pressure. Oxygen masks would drop from the ceiling. Well, I didn't know what cabin pressure is, but I didn't like hearing about that. We might lose it. The people in the video didn't look bothered at all when the oxygen masks dropped down, though. In fact, they looked kind of happy about it. Then the video got even worse. The narrator said that in case of a water landing, we need to evacuate the plane. Now, I was really freaked out. I thought the whole point of an airplane was that it was supposed to stay in the air. The safety video said there was an emergency exit on the plane, and then the people sitting in the exit rows would need to open the doors so everybody could get out. The emergency exit was 1 row behind me, and I realized the people sitting there weren't paying attention to the video at all. So I got them to put down their magazines and listen up. The flight attendants didn't seem bothered that no one was watching the safety video. I figured they might have their own exits, so if there was any trouble, I was gonna follow them. Like this. He imagined this thing. When they got to the toilet, they flushed the toilet, and they got back. The video showed the plane in the water with the inflatable slides coming in the emergency exits, and they exactly made it look fun. When the video said our seat cushions doubled as flotation devices, and each one had a whistle attached to it, now I had questions, so I pressed a button above my seat to the flight attendant to come over. What I wanted to know was, if we landed in shark-infested waters, would it really be such a good idea to blow the whistle? It felt to me like we'd basically be inviting the sharks over for a free lunch. My flight attendant said I didn't need to worry because all the seat cushions were coated with shark repellent, so they wouldn't even come near us. I'm pretty happy to hear it, but now I'm wondering if he was pulling my leg. I couldn't really get the point out of the whistles, though. It's not like anybody's gonna hear them if you're in the middle of the ocean, and you're lucky enough to have a cruise ship pass by. Believe me, those guys aren't stopping to pick you up. After the safety video was over, I felt exhausted, and we hadn't even taken off yet. But a few seconds later, the plane started rolling down the tarmac, and the next thing I knew, we were in the air. I'm not gonna lie, I had my eyes shut during the whole takeoff, and I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I almost passed out. Once we leveled off, the couple sitting in my row started feeding their baby. I was already nauseous from the takeoff, and the smell of mushy peas doesn't have thing. I thought I might actually throw up, but I didn't know what to do. Then I noticed this white paper bag in the seat pocket in front of me, and I figured out that's what it's exactly for. The flight attendant already seemed annoyed with me, though, and so I knew he wouldn't be too happy if I handed him a bag of vomit. Here you go. Somehow, I managed to get through the feeding without throwing up, but I wish I could say the same thing for the baby. After the lady cleaned it up, she reached into her bag and gave the baby a couple of toys to play with. One of the baby was a plastic hammer, and as soon as the baby got that in his hand, it started pounding out the window. I've heard that if a window on a plane breaks, everything inside gets sucked outside, and that didn't really seem like a good way to go. When the lady's hand was turned, I swiped the hammer from the baby and tucked it under my seat. Unfortunately, Dad set the baby off. It turns out nobody likes a crying baby on the plane, and everyone started shooting us dirty looks. Luckily, the baby had a bottle in her bag, and it quietened the baby for a while. I was getting kind of hungry myself, so I pressed the button for the flight attendant and asked why we could expect to get fed. But he said meals were only for first-class passengers, and he gave me a bag of peanuts to hold me over. That's when I remembered the snacks I bought before we got on the plane. But then I remembered that they were in my carry-on bag, which was stowed down below. I guess Mom must have been thinking about food too, because as soon as the pilot said we had reached our cruising altitude and we were free to move above the cabin, Mom unbuckled her seatbelt and went to the first class with Manny, just in time for dinner. I felt something cold and clammy touch my left elbow, then something else touched my right one. The guy behind me had taken off his shoes and socks and slid his feet through the spaces between the seats. So I guess this guy decided it was okay to use my armrests as his footrests. I was starting to feel boxed in, and then the people in the seat in front of me tilted the seat all the way back, so it was just a few inches from my face. I tried to tell myself seat back, but I couldn't find a button to do it. So I called the flight attendant and asked him where the button was, but he told me the seats in our row didn't tilt back because they blocked the emergency row. Now I was starting to sweat. I thought I'd get a magazine to take my mind off feeling trapped, but the only thing in the seat pocket was a catalog with the stuff unknown needs. Pizza blanket, snooze, phone bubble. The people on either side of them was watching a movie, so I figured I'd turn my screen on and check it out. The movie felt like a comedy, but my headphones were in my bag, and it was hard to understand what was going on without them. I changed the channel to see what else there was to watch. One channel had a show for little kids, and the baby next to me got interested in what was going on. I was on my screen, and when I changed it to something else, the kid started bawling. When I changed the channel back, the baby stopped crying. I guess I would have been okay letting the kid watch the show, but the screen was way too close to my face, and the colors of the show were so bright that even I put on the eye mask that was in the seat pocket, I could still see everything what was happening. When the show finally ended, the baby started crying again, but there was no way I was going to keep watching the show on repeat for the rest of the night. So I decided that it was the perfect time to ask my shift up in first class. But Roderick noticed I was going to make a move, and he got out of his seat before I had a chance to. And once he was up in first class, I knew I'd have to wait for a while before I could swap places with him. When Mom and Manny came back with their seats, I saw the door to the cockpit open behind them, and the pilot stepped out. I thought there might be some kind of an emergency, so I pressed a button and asked the flight attendant what was going on. He said the pilot just needed to stretch his legs and use the bathroom, and the co-pilot had everything under control. I didn't like the fact that we were down to one pilot, even if it was for just a few minutes. Personally, I don't think two pilots is enough, even when they're both in cockpit. I guess the idea is that if one of them has a heart attack, the other one is supposed to fly the plane. Well, I asked the flight attendant what happens when the other pilot freaks out and has a heart attack too. The flight attendant told me not to worry because these planes are so high-tech that they can practically fly themselves. Well, I've heard pilots make a lot of money, so if what the flight attendant was saying is true, then this could be the career for me. Once the pilot got out of the bathroom, I figured it would be a great idea for me to go too. The problem was the man to my right was asleep, and I couldn't get over the guy without waking him. So I went under him, and believe me, that wasn't a lot of fun. I walked toward the front of the plane, but before I even got to the first class section, the flight attendant told me that economy passengers have to use the restroom in the back. The bathroom in the economy section was really small, but being in there was 100 times better than being stuck in my seat. I was sort of like a tiny little apartment I had all to myself. In science class, we learned about that when a human waste gets dropped out of an airplane toilet, it freezes solid. Some guy in my town once found a chunk of waste that fell from a plane, and he thought it was a meteorite. I think that guy was hoping to sell it for a lot of money, but once the thing thawed, he found out it was totally worthless. One time I was settled into the bathroom. I figured there was no reason to go back to my seats. Whenever people else came along to use it, I just made the bathroom noises until they went away. One person must have really needed to go because they shook the door handle so hard that I thought it might actually break off. Then they went away. But a few minutes later, the whole bathroom shook. Whoever this was needed to use the bathroom a lot more than I did, so I opened the door, but there was no one there. That's why I realized it wasn't just a bathroom shaking, it was the whole plane. I thought we must land in water or lost an engine or something, but the pilot came to an intercom. Haha, folks, we just hit a little patch of bumpy air. That didn't sound right to me. I figured what really happened was that the pilot fell asleep in the seat and kicked at the steering wheel or something. Then he came out with his bumpy air excuse, because that's exactly what I'd do if I were in the same situation. I guess the flight attendant could see that I was pretty rattled. He said we were just going through a little turbulence, when it was perfectly normal for a flight like this. Well, if this kind of thing is normal, then there's no chance I'm ever becoming a pilot. Because if I were flying the plane, I'd be out of there at the first sign of trouble. The flight attendant told me I need to return to my seat and buckle up, but when I got back there, I was already occupied. I didn't want to remove the baby because I knew it would just wake and start crying again. So I went up to the front of the plane to kick Roderick out of his first class and let him deal with the baby. But I couldn't get to him. One of the wheels of the beverage cart had broken because of the turbulence, and it was blocking my way. I was out of options, so I went back to my seat. Don't ask me how, but I was actually able to get an hour or two of sleep. And I was so tired I didn't even wake up when we landed. Tuesday. I was so worried about getting through the flight that I never thought about what we were actually going. But when I stepped off the plane, it was like walking in a whole new world. I just gotta admit, as soon as I felt that tropical air hit my skin, I could understand why Dad was so eager to escape the cold back home. We got our luggage off the conveyor belt and the baggage claim. They followed the signs to where a big shuttle bus was waiting. Even though the air outside felt great, the air conditioning on the bus was even better, and the seats in these things were nicer than the ones in first class. Once all the passengers boarded the bus, we headed to the resort. A video played on the overhead monitors, and it was almost 1,000,000 times more fun than the one on the plane. The video showed all the cool activities at the resort, and I wanted to do them all. One of the activities was swimming with dolphins, and and that's something I've always wanted to do. But there was a bunch of other stuff that looked cool too. I was hoping they might let us combine activities so I could do everything before we had to go back home. I felt kind of bad for being so negative about this trip up until then. And I turned around to tell mom and dad I was sorry, but I wish I had just keep watching the video instead because they were kissing. When we stepped out the bus at the resort, the staff greeted us and handed mom and dad frozen drinks. Welcome to paradise. We gave our bag to these guys wearing white gloves, and they said they'd take them directly to our room. And I gotta say, I was impressed. We went to the front desk, and the lady there explained how everything worked. She said the resort was all inclusive, and we didn't need to use cash or credit cards. The way we paid for stuff was with these plastic cards that doubled as our room keys. Mom and Dad told the receptionist that we wanted to stay the same building they stayed in for their honeymoon, but the lady said the resort had changed since then. She said that now the resort was split into two halves, the wild side and the mild side. The place Mom and Dad had stayed was on the wild side, and the kids aren't allowed over there, so she showed us where our building was on the map. I could tell Dad was disappointed by the changes, but Mom said it was better this way. She said this was a family trip and we didn't need to be around a bunch of young couples partying anyway. I didn't care which side of the resort we were on because it looked like to me like both sides had the same basic stuff. What I really cared about was the room. Usually when my family stays at a hotel, we all share a room and I have to sleep on a cot or a sofa bed. I was pretty shocked to find out we were in a suite with plenty of space. Ooh. This was 2 rooms with a suite. We had to share one bathroom, but me and Roderick each had our own bed. Which of the main thing, all I can say is Mom and Dad must have dropped a lot of money on this trip. There was a TV in the room I was sharing with Roderick, but even better than that, there was a robe in the closet. I caught the robe right away, but Roderick didn't even fight me for it. Roderick always makes fun of me when I wear my mom's robe back at home. But I think robes are cool, and there are a lot of guys in the world who would agree with me on that. The shower in the bathroom was huge, and all the floors and sinks and everything were made of marble. There were TV above the bathtub, and there was even a phone next to the toilet. I figured if I could get room service delivered in the bathroom, I'd have everything I needed in one place. From the balcony in Mom and Dad's room, I could see the pool over to the wild side of the resort, and it was really big. It wasn't just a regular pool either. It looked kind of like a river and had all these islands in the middle of it. Mom said it was one of the world's biggest freeform pools in the world. Okay, I've read this enough. Okay. I'll read you the rest of the page next time. Okay, and thank you for watching this video. Bye!